Welcome to BCS, welcome to IT Now Magazine, and welcome to this special webinar where we will be discussing online harms. My name is Martin Cooper. I'm a journalist on IT Now Magazine. And I think just by way of an introduction, online harms, I'll confess it's a topic, and having talked to all the panelists, it's a topic in some way that makes me kind of quite sad, really. Sad because the internet is a wonderful resource, and sometimes I think we kind of lose sight of that. It's free, it's open, universal access. It's a mechanism that allows us to share and to collaborate, to do and see amazing things. And I'm reflecting on, I think, a talk that Professor Dame Wendy Hall did as part of our Insights conference, where she talked about how much darker I think COVID would have been without the internet. The internet allowed families to stay together during lockdown. It allowed our children to carry on being educated. It allowed business to carry on. And I think also, the internet allowed also that scientists to communicate and collaborate across the world to create the vaccine rather. But I think for all its brilliance, the average internet has a dark side. For some reason, good people, I think, are subjected to very bad treatment as they go about their internet lives. Bullying, stalking, defamation, racism, transphobia. Online abuse is a growing problem, and a problem that's damaging the internet. And more importantly, I think it's damaging lives in real and tangible ways. A click or a keystroke can take a second, a microsecond, but the trauma from something like that can last a lifetime. And I think that's our topic for today. Online abuse. What is it? Why does it happen? And how do we fix the problem? So enough from me. Why don't we start off by asking the panelists to introduce themselves. So starting at the top of my screen, which is in no particular order, Abigail.
Hi, everyone. I'm Abby. I've been working with kind of online hate and a lot of abuse-related incidents over the past kind of 3-4 years. So I run a thing called the Trans Tech Tent, which is where we kind of equip people in the trans community to deal with things online, how to engage with communities in a healthy manner. So how to handle when people aren't particularly polite or accepting of your existence at times. And we also work with different kind of online streaming communities, Discord servers, things like that, to tell people, ways of making their community healthier for everyone. Things like what kind of content should be in your code of conduct, and how to enforce that in a way that means dominant voices don't take over the chat.
Wonderful, thank you. And Andy.
Hello, all. I'm Andy Phippen, Professor of Digital Rights at Bournemouth University. I have worked in this area probably for about 20 years now. My background is actually, unusually for academics working in this area, computer science. But I moved more and more into ethical practice in computer science, and then I am told I have disclosure face, which means that people tell me stuff. So I spend a lot of time talking to young people about their use of technology and things, and the flip side of that, the far less enjoyable side of that, is trying to explain to policymakers why their latest crazy idea, after watching too much Skyfall, isn't going to work and isn't going to prevent harm online. But I'm sure I'll pick that up later on in this webinar.
So, a disclosure: is that a plasma ball over your shoulder on the top of your shelf?
Yes, it is. Yeah. This is my office Warhammer and geek room. So yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff in here.
And Emma.
Yep. Hi. Thanks ever so much for inviting me. It's really good to be here. I've been working in this field for, I would say, about 15 years plus, but I've always been fortunate to work with people from, say, the British Computer Society, computer scientists, and as well as working with third sector and with people who are engaged in responding to victims of stalking and things like coercive control. Working with computer scientists and so on has really given me a balance, because as well as wanting to reduce the harms, people who are involved in the technology want to preserve the technology, because just as you said right at the beginning, Martin, you know, it's a very enabling and special place, and it gives enormous opportunities as well as opportunities to exploit. So I've been very fortunate, I think, to work across disciplines. So I'm currently at De Montfort University, leading the Psych and Tech cluster. So that's me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, guys. What I should say before we get into the questions is we'd like this to be very much an interactive webinar. So if you do have any questions, please put them into the chat. We'll pick them up at the end. If we don't have time, we'll make sure the guys can answer them offline, and we can publish an article on BCS's website. But anyway, let's get into the meat of the session. So online harm and abuse. I mean, I'm interested to understand, I guess, the reality for victims. What does it feel like? What are we actually talking about here? Maybe Abigail, you'd like to sort of lead us on this one.
So obviously, when we're online, it's kind of, I suppose being online is like a force multiplier for people to do things that they would actually normally do in person or behind closed doors. It gives them a voice where they can say whatever they like, and also they can project that to people around them, right? So if you have, say, one person who says, let's go with something particularly racist about, say, a football player in the past couple months, you'll have a whole group of people who can see that, and then they're like, oh, this is acceptable. They haven't been banned. No one's kind of gone after them. There's no repercussions. So that allows kind of abuse to multiply online. And I think that's one of the big things. But we also have the ability for these people to organize in their own spaces online. And while everyone should have access to a space to voice their opinions and kind of grow and expand their worldview through contact with everyone, some people are choosing to turn that into a much less welcoming place, put it that way. I've had a couple people who have banded together with, well, I say a couple people, it's probably in the triple digits now. People will go online, they'll band together, and they'll all like change their names and profiles around to something really offensive, and then come join people's servers or join people's spaces where they're very much not welcome to say their piece, and then run away immediately after.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I think when we scoped out this webinar, I think we all were quite interested in the idea of why, you know, yeah, what's special, what's different about being online that makes some people feel free to say, or uninhibited to say or do whatever they want. Why are people more abusive online? I mean, could you maybe talk to that point, Emma?
Yeah, I mean, you can answer this question on so many levels. You know, you can talk about context, you know, i.e. some sites or platforms are notoriously more aggressive or abusive than others. Things like dragging sites, for example, which are literally designed to take other people down. And when you get sort of escape from that, or spillage from that onto a mainstream platform like Twitter, the degree of hate feels really disproportionate and frightening. You could also talk about the situational stuff like you just have, Abigail, you know, where there is something happening that has an enormous wave that people go along with, like the Euros and the racist attacks. But equally, that brought with it a really positive response of defence and sort of more positive counter speech. But because I'm here as a psychologist, let's sort of focus on a couple of things that individuals might experience psychologically. And I'm going to go back to basically the person who is the guru in this area, and that's John Suler's work in 2004. He talked about something called the online disinhibition effect. Okay, and some of the components of that facilitate a much more open, quickly escalating form of expression. So you'd probably start with the idea of anonymity, which we all know about. You know, obviously concealed identity is going to be quite enabling, but even when our identity isn't concealed, you have invisibility. So it might be known who we are, but people can't see us when we're there quite often. We can sort of scoot about, see what people are doing. And when we form our communications, no one can see us in the process of that. So you don't get the normal cues of eye rolling, perhaps, if you're beginning to say something terrible. And equally, you can't see the person's response in real time as they read the message. It's out there before there's been any social cues in terms of its appropriateness. But that's, I mean, as it's a Monday lunchtime, and I think you're only waking up, let's talk about one of the more obscure kind of aspects of online disinhibition, and that is, can I say it with, I'm not sure I've got the right teeth in, but solipsistic introjection. And that's where we read speech, and we often read it and we hear our own voice, but the idea extends to us associating a voice with the text we're reading. So it might be an accurate voice. So, for example, if I see the word Brexit means Brexit, I hear Theresa May's voice. Okay, so she's in my head. There's kind of a mind merge. I'm hearing her and she's in my head. But when you don't know people and you read their texts and you're in a polarized group, you might attribute a voice to them with an identity that meets your expectations of who those people are, for good or for bad. And because that then takes life in your head, the emotion that you attach to your response, be it positive or negative, is likely to be exaggerated or enhanced by that introjection. So lots of different reasons, but that's the one that I thought might be interesting to hear about today.
Andy, from your perspective, why? Is there something special or unique about the internet?
Not really. It just gives people more opportunity to be dicks, I guess. I will pick you up on the point you said earlier, because you said the internet has a dark side. The internet doesn't have a dark side. The internet's just a collection of cables and wires and routers and stuff. Society has a dark side, and it's reflected in the internet. I think some of the points in the chat are already pulling up the fact that, you know, if you have a disconnect in terms of the impact of your words, you are more likely to say them. And equally, if you, well, this, you know, the example I always give is, you know, 20 years ago, you had someone sat on a bar stool shouting racist abuse. Most people in the pub will tell them to shut up. Now, if someone goes online and starts spouting racist abuse, thousands of people will like their comment and go, well done, you're being really brave by saying that. So regardless of how abhorrent your view is, you will have some people that facilitate it. And as a result of that, you're more confident in expressing that facilitation. And that's, you know, that's one of the challenges we have online. But also, I mean, I'll bring this in now, I'm sure we'll pick up a lot of it later. We have virtually no education around this area whatsoever. So everyone brings their own value biases and their own personal judgments to these things. I spend a lot of time talking to young people who will point blank refuse to report abusive comments because there's no point, because no one will do anything about it. Now, myself and some of my friends, I'm a bit of a lurker on Twitter. I don't do much on Twitter myself, but you know, we will probably get about one racist a week banned from Twitter. You know, everyone sort of gets together, reports the post, the account gets banned. Having conversations with young people about this sort of thing is to go, oh, does that actually work? So you know, you have the fact that we are all basically groping in the dark about these sorts of things, and we learn from our own experiences, which is kind of fine on a social level. But if then you're a police officer, or you're a teacher, or you're a politician, it terrifies me, the lack of STEM knowledge within the political space, and then they're bringing that complete lack of knowledge into the decisions they're making. You know, when I look at so many statements about revenge porn victims, and they are told that, well, you know, you shouldn't have taken a picture, should you, love? Then he wouldn't have been able to share them, should you? You know, that sort of thing is not once or twice, that's endemic. And, you know, Emma Bond at Suffolk did a lot of work looking at whether police have received any training in image-based abuse whatsoever, and 95% of them came back and said, no, they didn't. So they're bringing their own biases, they're bringing their own judgments to it. I'd hesitate to use the word unconscious biases, because I think that gives people a get out. It's like, oh, I didn't realize it's unconscious. They're not unconscious. You're aware of them. It's just sometimes online they are being facilitated as well.
Thank you. And Abigail, I can see you nodding furiously at various points there.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence of kind of common social biases leaking in. I have had plenty of instances that I could have reported to the police, as I'm sure plenty of people either in chat or even in this group here have. The problem is, a lot of the time you have to get people who do understand, like that 95% who haven't, you have to get through to the 5% of, say, officers, or the 5% of administrators who do get what's going on with online abuse. Otherwise, they're very typically just going to shrug, say it's not our responsibility, you need to go to a completely different organization that doesn't deal with it. or just kind of brush you off as easy as they can because they don't think that it's their responsibility and they don't think that they need to get involved. That happens a lot, especially like online administrators, very common. With the police, I find that it's more of a 50-50 situation.
Thank you. Andy's term, groping in the dark. I mean, there's one group I think who set themselves up as the experts and very much kind of living in the light here. The tech firms. I'm just interested to know what answers the tech firms are tabling here, and do the panelists think that these technological solutions are actually helping? Maybe Andy, you'd like to start us off on that one. What are the tech firms doing, and is it working?
Well, there's two things the tech firms are doing. First of all, the stuff that they are providing because they think it's useful. So, I mean, 10 years ago, I'd have been sat here going, tech firms are, just a shower of wankers and they don't care about anything. These days, I do think they are trying to do quite a lot. They are providing tools for blocking. They are providing tools for reporting. They are providing tools for muting. The challenge is getting people to believe that that's going to be effective. Now, one of the few good things I think coming out of the online safety bill, we could do a whole different webinar on that, and I could probably spend the next hour talking about why it's bad, is the fact that transparency reporting is going to be coming out as a legislative expectation, which means companies will have to provide details on the number of reports they've received, the number of accounts they've taken down, the number of reports they've upheld and similar. That's really positive stuff. Because people will start to believe it more if they can see more and more evidence of it happening. And you look at something like chat roulette, which, back in the old days of chat roulette, you'd basically connect to it and see someone in the world masturbating. Now they started to police themselves, so you could report the IP address of the person who sat there masturbating. So everyone shifted off onto Omegle. I still don't understand. It's like, oh, how do you like to talk to someone else on the other side of the world? I know what I'll do. I'll sit here naked and masturbate while I'm doing it. But chat roulette policed itself. The community policed itself. It's not something the companies can do on their own, which is why at the moment it is a little frustrating that they are starting to do things because they think they need to be doing things because there's greater legislation coming. When you have Johnson saying really bovine stuff in PMQs just before the summer holidays, where he was challenged on online abuse of footballers. He said, oh, well, the online safety bill is going to sort that. Twitter could do something about it. We all know they could do if they wanted to. You sort of sit there and go, really? Can they actually sort out racism, this social problem? I always fall back on Raynham's law. So Marcus Raynham was a cybersecurity researcher. I frequently quote his law, which is you don't solve social problems with software. Software is a tool. Software provides a number of opportunities to try and deal with some of these issues. But the idea that Twitter will get rid of all the racism in the world is it's just incredibly dumb. But it also deflects from the fact that maybe politicians could be doing more in terms of education programs, in terms of more effective training. You have within the education sector statutory requirements for teachers to be trained about online safety, and the people that have to make sure that is rigorous and effective are school governors. Now, I've met a lot of school governors. Not many of them are that up on tech tools, safety tech, all those sorts of things as well.
Interesting stuff. And I think looking back to the chat, actually, there's a lot of stuff in there about anonymity. I mean, Abigail, this idea of anonymity and managing our identities and how our identities are negotiated online, is there a sort of technical solution in there that the tech firms could use, a more kind of elegant, blockchain-based version of identity that could help solve all of this?
I have been waiting a long time to have the opportunity to publicly dunk on blockchain solutions. No, there are plenty of technical solutions out in the world that are trying to solve this, and it's just like Andy said, it is technology chasing a social problem, and it doesn't fundamentally work because it's like the concept of cyberpunk. You are chasing high technology without the underlying ethics, without the underlying social change and progress that you need to make that good for society. So, for instance, we had the verified ID kind of debate going on the government has thankfully struck it down. And the reason that they struck it down in the end was, despite the fact that it was pretty popular online and got a lot of people talking about it, 3 million people in the country, for starters, didn't even have ID. And most of the people who don't have ID are people who are too poor to afford a passport, or people who are disabled. They can't drive, they can't travel that far. So they're like, do I need to go abroad? Do I need that passport? Can I afford that passport on universal credit? Because that passport will cost them about a month's worth of their universal credit on its own. There's a lot of technical solutions that don't bear in mind like minority groups. Obviously, verified ID, very difficult to change your identity, as most trans people will know. It's taken months and months to get people to acknowledge that you are who you say you are, even when you put the legal document in their face and you're like, this is me. The government agree that I am this person. Please, can you change that? So there are obviously a lot of things missing with edge cases, things to consider with technology. And then we start crawling into the blockchain space. Actually, I'm reading a lot into this because I feel like if I'm going to criticize blockchain, then I need to do the background work and explain exactly why different solutions won't function. My old university published a paper that they did for the DVLA, and they found very quickly that putting people's identity on an immutable blockchain is a really bad idea because everyone can read it and everyone has access to it. Now, there is talk about decentralized identifiers. The World Wide Web Consortium are looking at that right now. Solves some of the problems of blockchain, keeps the identity off of it while still having the communication, the requests sent across it. That's slightly more promising. But at the end of the day, does verifying people actually stop online abuse? Or are people just going to keep using their real names with pictures of themselves, like at a barbecue, or posting pictures of their cats online, which I am very guilty of, from continuing to act in the ways that they do? Like, everyone on Facebook will know, like, say, for example, their racist uncle, typical trope of the guy who will just say whatever he wants, and there are no consequences because there are no real social consequences to his actions. If you get banned off Twitter, what are you going to do? Make another account, come back, move on to Parler, move on to whatever other social media site lets you say horrible things.
Yeah, all very valid points. And I think there'd be some. I haven't quite got Andy's bravery when it comes to reading out the comments, but there's certainly some choice remarks in the chat about blockchain's validity here as a solution. But just deviating now completely off piece from the questions we all agreed, bringing it down from the huge big tech buzzwords like blockchain just down to the very human. Andy talked about this idea of muting, and Emma, from your perspective, is muting really the answer? Can that fix the problem? Is it just does the solution sit with us?
Okay, I mean, I think muting is a good idea if it's causing you upset, but I would always, I come from stalking, fixated abuse, pursuit, where you are being targeted and it's likely the risk is escalating. So I would always suggest going to look at the media accounts that this abuse is coming from. Are they generally abusive? Are they abusing everyone? In which case you've got caught in the crossfire. But if they are just abusing you, I think it's quite important to keep that account visible so you can assess the risk or seek support, and you've got the evidence to provide should you need to take action.
Good. Thank you. At the risk of now using yet another great term from the tech industry, AI. And it's tempting to think that maybe AI is the answer to all of this. I can see Andy smiling there. This idea that we could just somehow compress abuse into mathematics and then just give posts a kind of a validity score, a sort of good taste score, and if it passes, post it. Guys, do we think AI really is the answer? And I think Andy looks like he's barely held himself back. So
I'm an old fart, so I've been through about 3 AI summers where AI is going to be the solution to everything. And then you sort of bump into a policymaker and they go, "Oh, you've seen the Terminator, that's 5 years off now." And you go, "No, it isn't, don't be so stupid." AI is great at narrow systems with a lot of very specific focus data. You know, one of the wonderful examples is tumor diagnosis. So you can chuck a huge amount of images of tumors, an image recognition system, and then it will start to recognize novel ones. Now take that to a massively open system such as Twitter and go, right, now identify racism. Here is a corpus of racist terms. So if you see terms like this, they might be racist. The PR disaster with Twitter starts to accuse people of being racist is going to be interesting anyway. But you know, I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, but the chap who had the flare up his backside just before the England football match with the Euro finals is now classified as a sexual and nude image on Facebook. Why is that? Because that's all Facebook can do, is to hash that sort of thing. Now, you know, I know a few folk at Facebook. I'm like, well, first of all, it's not nudity because you can't see his backside. It's covered in red smoke. And secondly, if that's a sexual image for you, then, you know, that's pretty niche. But you know, if you're looking at large, open, complex systems, you know, you can identify some things quite easily if people are using offensive racist terms. That's fairly straightforward. If they're not, you know, it's the classic one about porn filtering as well, why Scunthorpe still gets grabbed by porn filters and stuff, because if you are identifying things through sexual keywords or whatever, then you're going to have a lot of false positives. Having false positives when you're accusing people of racism or whatever, or the other typical thing that some of my more potty-mouthed friends come up with on Facebook is, oh, are you sure you want to post this? This looks a lot like abuse that people have posted in the past. AI doesn't do these things in a complete 100% accurate way. That makes it very dangerous in open systems. You know, rather famously, Twitter was very good at pulling down Islamist abuse, but it wasn't very good at far right because it kept on flagging up Republican senators and the president of the United States and stuff at the time, because that was the discourse they were using as well. I think it's a really good tool, and it's a bit different to the old days. You don't have to write your own neural networks anymore. You know, you just sort of download the libraries. You guys don't know, you're born. But it's never going to be a complete solution, no matter how much that politicians nod and go, but AI can sort this all out, which they basically say about anything these days anyway.
Looking down, I guess, the other end of the AI rifle, then, you know, do we as users of social media platforms have any hope in hell of kind of steering or influencing the algorithms by downticking, by deleting, by reporting? Is there any way, I'm kind of looking your direction, Abigail, here, can we as users and sort of right-minded users have a hope in hell of statistically influencing the AIs that social media platforms use?
So it feels very much like tech has now created a problem, and we as society have to rectify the problem that we've created by technical implementation. We have a big problem with minority groups in any social circle, is the fact that there's like a 10-to-1 ratio of people who are going to cause you problems, and obviously you sat in the corner just trying to live your life. So you'll have, if you have an upvote downvote system, then what you'll see is a trans person like, hey, I run a bar in Scotland and I'm having a great time enjoying my life. And then 100 people who aren't particularly big fans of trans people come online and they start saying a whole bunch of horrible things. But they're also, at the same time, they're downvoting and they're generating negative connotations or any kind of whatever they can. They're trying to block accounts. They're trying to report the account for abuse when it's done nothing wrong. They're just trying to trip all the automated systems. They're trying to use the technology against people. So I think if the average person sees abuse online, then yeah, take part in that system of upvotes and downvotes, or however it works. Give positive attention to good sources and try and take away that positive attention, or try and give negative weight to people who are causing abuse. But the technical solution itself is far, far from ideal. We have people who are circumventing, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier. They're circumventing things like AI with bad words, or like word block lists or sentiment block lists, by creating fake accounts for trans people. Like someone will create a fake account for a trans person, and then they'll start sending abuse to other trans people. But because the way that they're phrasing things and the way that they're couching all of their language in this kind of hidden veil of like vitriol, they're making a toxic environment without any automated system being able to catch it. So we keep putting in technical solutions, and we keep making a new need for us to come along as society and engage with that solution in a positive way, despite the fact that it's not really working that well.
Thank you. Well, I guess it's bringing this to a close. I guess it's what do we think will work? And I'm just interested from all the panel really in this idea of, you know, as responsible web citizens, what could we be doing? What should we be doing? Is it influencing policy? Is it influencing technology? Is it doing just human things, allyship, calling out, those sorts of things? So maybe Emma, do you want to start us off on this one? What should we be doing?
Okay, I'm going to go off slightly on a limb, having just come out from some research with the police, who clearly have an appetite for more information and training on cyber. And I think one of the big tech solutions isn't necessarily design, but it's free training, free resources, and support of the police to upskill them so they can respond to this better.
Thank you. And Andy, what should we be doing? If you know, what should we take away from this?
I'm just one of these woolly types that talks about multi-stakeholder perspectives and the fact that everyone has to buy into it. I think from the BCS perspective, what I'd like to see in terms of representing the membership is a little bit of pushback, because it's gone. I mean, if you look at the online safety bill, they really shouldn't call it the online safety bill. They should call it the regulation of platforms bill. There's very little about anything other than platforms need to do more. And they've got this wonderfully intangible duty of care in there, and the fact that harmful but legal content, which is identified as such by something like an ordinary responsible adult. I mean, the people that are going to make a lot of money out of the online safety bill are negligence lawyers, because it's just going to be wonderful. Someone abused me and your risk assessment doesn't look effective enough, you know. So it would be good if the BCS were going, you know, the tech sector can only do so much. But I completely agree with what Emma said, you know, in terms of feeding knowledge into other stakeholders is really important. You know, picking up on a couple of Dawn's comments about the fact that those with safeguarding, sorry, I'm just looking at Dawn's comments in the chat, in terms of the people with safeguarding responsibilities often have other responsibilities as well, and it's just paid for as lip service. You know, if you look at the education sector, we know that statutory change that happened in 2012 meant that senior leaders will take it more seriously, but they've got a whole ton of different conflicting priorities now. But I always come back to the fact that education is absolutely essential in this area, and it's done incredibly badly. You know, I think if you look at something like cybersecurity knowledge or skills, I think you can probably go from the age of 13 and never have any exposure to cybersecurity training again. Now, sometimes we seem to run on two parallel lines between the safeguarding world and cybersecurity world. The example I always give is if you've got good cybersecurity practices, you're more likely to be able to protect your assets. So people aren't going to access your cloud stores and download your nudes and stuff like that. You know, there are some aspects of cybersecurity. It's not just a case of we'll leave that to the geeks. They can sort that out. I mean, what's happening in the university sector at the moment, which I think is slightly hilarious, is that they've massively underinvested in cybersecurity for years, and now they're subject to massive amounts of ransomware attacks. And the 1.5 FTE cybersecurity folk in the university are now being told, how did you allow that to happen? And they're just like, we've been asking for resources for years, and we've been asking if we can do phishing simulations, and you said no because it might upset somebody. So, you know, it has to be something that is brought across the massive number of different stakeholders, and to be incredibly mindful of the rights of individuals as well. I meet too many people in sort of social care and education that think mass surveillance is the answer, and clearly it's not.
Yeah, I met the chairperson of a well-known cybersecurity firm, and he advocated that everyone should have an identity card before they were allowed onto the internet.
Yes, I've met a few cybersecurity professionals that have we should be able to scan your devices before you connect to our networks. Yeah.
And Abigail, I mean, if you can draw us to a close, what should we as responsible thinking web citizens be doing now?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I take from Andy and Emma here, it's a lot of education and a lot of talking and getting the word out, but also we need to talk to experts about it. And when I say experts, I don't necessarily mean people who have a formal education in the field. It's also people who are affected by those issues. So obviously we've been talking about racism for the whole chat, but we haven't had a direct input this whole call from people of color on the subject. It would be nice to bring people in from each group to have them talk about the issues that are directly affecting them in their own words. We often, when we or allies, people on the periphery of the issue are talking about it, they'll rephrase things and they'll lose some nuance, or they'll change the way that they talk about it to kind of not upset people and not rock the boat too much. But yeah, we do need people to understand that when trans people are talking about their problems, when people of color are talking about their issues, when women are talking about theirs as well, there's a lot of cyber stalking going on in the world still, that they have a level of expertise through having lived through all of this, and to kind of elevate those experiences above the opinions of people who are armchair theorizing. Now, I know that obviously Andy and Emma have got very deep in with their studies, and they've definitely talked to the right people and the right groups to get some good messaging in. But it's a lot of people online who have read a couple books or seen one interview on a YouTube series, and they've gone, I know what this is all about now. I have very strong opinions. We need to make sure that we're getting the right people to talk about their issues and be open, and to just take what they say at face value without having to need to push back against them, question them, gaslight them over whether or not they really face that problem, or if it was really their fault. So talking to those groups, taking on their opinions and using that to help form your own, very good idea. And that'll help expand a social base for more healthy change in the future, I think.
Yeah, all very good points. And I'm sort of minded to the discussion you and I had whilst we were scoping this out about avoiding echo chambers. And these are, I think, and I think it was your point when we talked about, these are difficult topics to talk about. You know, they're hard human things to discuss. But I think I'd like just leafing through the quotes. I think I quite like from Alice Croft the be the change you want to see, and I think that's probably a good point to leave this on. Andy's right. You know, the internet is just a collection of wires, and it is about the people on there and how we use it. And I think we have a responsibility to use it in a thinking, reflective, and I think, as Andy said, education has a part to play. It's not a part to play, he said, stuttering. It's not a technology solution. It's a solution for a multifaceted solution with many answers. So I'd like to thank everyone for their time. We'll make this video available on online and write up the article as well for IT Now for the website. I'll leave through the comments and questions, and if there's any, if we can find some, we'll get the guys to answer them and post those online as well. So thank you very much, guys. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.